All right, so in part 1, we cracked open the secret blueprint of corporatism.
This radical third way, right? The one that was pitched as the perfect path right between capitalism and communism?
We laid out the whole theory, the structure. But look, a blueprint is just paper until someone actually starts building with it.
And that's what we're doing now. We are pulling back the curtain to expose the wildly different regimes that use this exact playbook to become terrifyingly powerful, terrifyingly fast. This is where it gets real.
Okay, so to really get how this playbook works, you've got to throw out the usual political labels. Forget left versus right for a second. The real key here is a concept that ties all these regimes together. It's called the developmental dictatorship.
And what does that actually mean? It means for these states, the official ideology, whether it's fascism, communism, you name it, it's just window dressing. It's a marketing tool. The real goal, the only thing that matters, is raw national power and industrializing at breakneck speed, all led by the state. The ends, well, they always justify the means.
Now, this quote is fascinating. It's so revealing. The historian A. James Gregor pointed out that Mussolini didn't see fascism as some abstract philosophy. No, for him it was a practical tool, a hands-on model for dragging a country kicking and screaming into the industrial age. He even hijacked language from the left, calling Italy a proletarian nation, fighting against the rich plutocratic nations. See? It's all about the narrative.
And that brings us right to our first and maybe most obvious case studies, the regimes that took this model and absolutely perfected it for total state control.
Mussolini's Italy is the textbook case. Seriously, this wasn't some chaotic power grab, it was a well-oiled machine. Here's the breakdown. First, you organize everyone, workers, bosses, the whole lot, into these things called syndicates. Then you group those syndicates into massive corporations that cover every single part of the economy. And finally, those corporations send their people to a big national council where, guess who's in charge? The state, overseeing everything: wages, prices, production, total control.
And this wasn't just some idea on paper, not at all. After creating this thing called the IRI, the Institute for Industrial Reconstruction, state control became, well, absolute. Mussolini himself bragged that a staggering 75% of the entire Italian economy was effectively in the hands of the state. Private profit? Suddenly, that was totally irrelevant. All that mattered were the goals of the nation.
Okay, now let's jump over to Nazi Germany. The architecture looks a little different, but the goal? It's identical. Instead of Italy's formal corporate setup, the Nazis built what they called a managed economy. They used these huge state-run networks, like the German Labor Front, to pull every single lever of industry. The state told you what to make, who to hire, and what you could sell it for. So yeah, you might legally own your factory, but it was private ownership in name only.
In this quote, this gets to the absolute core of their philosophy. The Volksgemeinschaft, the folk community, was everything. The public good, which of course was defined by the Nazi Party, completely crushed any private interest. Business owners weren't entrepreneurs anymore. They were basically reduced to what the sources call economic functionaries. You're just a cog in the state's massive war machine, serving the nation, not your own bottom line.
Now look, if the story ended right there, with the fascists, this would be a pretty straightforward history lesson. Simple. But the evidence doesn't stop there. It leads somewhere pretty shocking, actually.
So you're probably thinking, okay, I get it. This is a fascist playbook, right? But what if I told you that was just the beginning?
Because this playbook was just getting started. To see where it went next, we have to look at a really unlikely architect, Vladimir Lenin. He inherited a completely backward agrarian Russia and knew he had to industrialize it like yesterday. So what was his solution? A super pragmatic form of state capitalism, using a centrally controlled economy to force that change.
And this is where it all just clicks into place. The labels are meaningless. The sources show us that both Lenin and Mao used the terms state capitalism and state socialism pretty much interchangeably. Even Mussolini saw the direct connection. He said one was just the other turned on its head. At the end of the day, he argued, the result is exactly the same, the total bureaucratization of the economic activities of the nation.
Which brings us to modern China. Despite the official Marxist label, it operates a classic corporatist system. One of their key tools is something called the United Front. It's basically a principle of working with your secondary enemies, in this case, private companies and entrepreneurs, to achieve the main goal, strengthening total social control and state power. Private companies can exist, they can even get rich, but only as long as they serve the strategic goals of the state. It is the developmental dictatorship model in its purest modern form.
But here's the thing. This playbook wasn't even invented in the 20th century. When you pull back and widen the investigation, you start to see this same pattern popping up again and again and again all throughout history.
Yeah, this pattern is ancient. Think about it. Go back to the 13th century. You had medieval craft guilds controlling all trade, pushing this idea of a collective, corporate life. Then jump to the 1880s. Bismarck's Germany rolls out state socialism, using social welfare not out of kindness, but to bind the workers' loyalty to the state itself. Then, of course, the fascists come along and perfect the model for total control. And today, modern China uses the tools of the market for purely state-driven goals. It's the same playbook, every time, just with a different cover.
So, what does all this mean? It means we have to look past the slogans and the flags. We need a unified theory of power that connects all these regimes that, on the surface, look totally different.
And this slide just lays the whole model bare. It doesn't matter if a regime calls itself state socialist and uses a central planning committee, or calls itself state capitalist and uses state-directed corporations. The method is just semantics. Look at that bottom row. The outcome is always identical. A centralized, authoritarian state gets total control of the economy. Period.
And in the end, they all merge into one single, brutally effective strategy. This isn't about left versus right. It's about a centralized power using a corporatist structure to manage every bit of economic activity for its own national ambitions. That is the dictator's playbook.
Which, of course, leads us to the final, unavoidable question. If this is the secret playbook for power, a model proven to work by fascists, communists, and authoritarians all across history, who's using it today?